ইন্ডিয়ার কোঅর্ডিনেটর এবং ইন্ডিয়ান সোশ্যাল অ্যাকশন ফোরাম ইনসাফের প্রেসিডেন্ট বিদ্যা দিনকার। আমি আপনাদের সবাইকে আন্তরিক আহ্বান জানাচ্ছি এখানে অংশগ্রহণ করার জন্য, এবং বিদ্যাকে আমি আহ্বান জানাচ্ছি সেশন শুরু করার জন্য। ধন্যবাদ।
বেশি না না, বাংলাতে বলবো না। Welcome. This is a no-brainer, right? Climate change and what is it? Just transition or equitable? But this is why we're all here. Climate change and energy transition. Thanks. We seem to have an almost full hall, which is very encouraging considering that there are parallel sessions on. We have a very eminent panel. And of course, we have a guest of honor that everyone just loves to listen to. So the star attraction means that everyone here in the hall is definitely looking forward to listening to you, Rizwana. But meanwhile, we also have very important voices from across the region and beyond who will give us their thoughts on climate change and energy transition. You know, I remember, I'm old enough to remember a time when I think 95% did not believe that there was something like climate change. Today we are talking of the climate emergency. No one can be a climate denier anymore. And so we've come a long way, and really the time for an energy transition is also clear to everyone. So what is, even the mic went silent. There is nothing to talk about. And yet we have put together a panel that hopes to speak some sense in all the din where people are saying it's a climate emergency, we've already crossed the line, what are we doing, why are we slowing down, we need to do more. And even our own governments are now talking the same talk. So happily, civil society, private players, the man and woman on the street, and governments are speaking the same thing when it comes to the climate crisis and the need for transitioning. Some are even calling it a transformational jump that we need to do. Because obviously there are some laggards, obviously finance is always a difficult thing. So here we are. To try and talk about everything that is needed. The will, the political will, which I'm sure some of us will talk about. Where is the finance for this transition? Where is the will, etc. We have very eminent speakers, and I'll invite onto stage Meg Fukuzawa from Market Forces, and she is their energy finance campaigner. Come up, Meg. Come take a seat. And Malu, who's already gotten up and is coming very obediently onto the stage, is senior energy campaigner. No, she's gone off somewhere in her own way. Come. So Malu Tabios Niora is the senior energy campaigner with Asian People's Movement on Debt and Development that Malu has been with for what, 20 years? Not yet. That was a forecast that you're going to be right there until it's 20. Okay. And our third presenter is from Jaxis. And Marika Kita will be talking about a very important matter to all of us. We know that the Japanese are primarily responsible for the IEP. Why is my mic giving up on us? At the back. You cannot silence us. Our time is now. Okay. Marika is going to talk about the IEP MP and the Paris Agreement. And really, most of us here are really looking at slowing it down, stopping it, and maybe throwing it out of the window. So let's see what Marika has to say to us and how she can help with her perspective on how we can do this with the help, of course, of Jaxis, her group, which is, of course, the Japan Center for Sustainable Environment and Society. In the chair today is Barrister Jyotirmoy Barua. He's well known in the country. Maybe Rizwana is sort of more than well known, but Barua really holds his own in this country. He's a lawyer also in the Supreme Court of Bangladesh, and you are coordinator of LNSP, Life and Nature Safeguard Platform. Thanks, Jyotirmoy, for being here. And of course, give a hand to our guest of honor, Sayyida Rizwana Hassan, Chief Executive of Bangladesh Environmental Lawyers Collective. Have you not got any lunch? Did you not show your coupons? There you go. Okay. Because she is a difficult woman. If you do not please her with your clap, she will not even come up to the stage and take her seat. That's Rizwana for you. There you go. So without further ado, because I know that we're all going to be waiting to listen to all our eminent speakers here, we'll begin with presentation one, with Meg coming up on the role of the private sector in just transitioning. We all know that we need to have a just transition. We're all sometimes mighty suspicious of the private sector, its role, and how it intends to play its role. They all talk the right talk, right? They land up at COP, they say the right things to our governments, to our people, to financiers. But really, a critical look at the role of the private sector, and who better to do it than market forces, because they've been really pushing out problematic finance out of fossil fuels. And there you are, Meg. Do you want to do it there? Or? Okay.
Okay, can you hear me? All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Meg Ghazal from Market Forces. Hi. So yeah, Market Forces is an organization in Australia that works with finance and prevent investments in projects that drive climate change. And maybe if I can get the presentation slide. Yeah? Okay. Closer. Okay. All right. Great. Yeah, and I'm also Japanese and American, so good person to talk about all the Japanese and American private corporations involved in Bangladesh. Yeah, I'm going to be talking about the role of the private sector in a just transition. Next slide, please. So yeah, it's really vital to talk about the private sector companies because they're really heavily involved in the LNG value chain in Bangladesh. I'm looking here at this. If you look at this slide, you can see a lot of Japanese and also one US company. These are the companies that are really heavily involved in Bangladesh for building new LNG infrastructure here. You can see JERA, which has been mentioned in other panels. It's the largest power generation company in Japan. You can see they're involved in both terminals as well as power plants. And then you can see some maybe familiar companies. These are Japanese trading houses. They trade in various products, services, and sometimes they're involved as sponsors of fossil fuel projects or sometimes as EPC contractors, so engineering, procurement, and construction contractors that build the power plants. So you can see here there's Sumitomo Corporation, Marubeni, Mitsui, Mitsubishi Corporation. These are all Japanese trading houses that, more? Okay. These are all Japanese trading houses that are currently trying to be involved in building new LNG in Bangladesh. Next slide, please. Oh, and also GE, sorry, forgot to mention GE, very important player in Bangladesh as well in LNG and gas. So all of these companies often talk about being part of a just transition. We talk to these companies, we have meetings with them, and they say, yeah, we're all for a just transition, and this is why we have to bring fossil fuels to countries like Bangladesh, to countries like Vietnam, for example. And they also have set. They've also set. Oh, is that me? Okay. And they've also set net zero emissions by 2050 commitments. But it's quite problematic. What they're saying and what they commit to is really, when you look at the actual context of what they're doing and of their policies, it's not exactly true. So you can see in the example from the slide before that they're really heavily involved in trying to expand LNG in Bangladesh. So that's one problematic thing that doesn't really seem to match up with a net zero by 2050 commitment. They also don't have policies to rule out or restrict new oil and gas projects. They consider LNG as a transition fuel. They think it's part of a just transition to push fossil fuels on countries like Bangladesh. And they're also often using offsets and unproven technologies to meet commitments. And other panelists in Dana, like Aifa, they've talked about these technologies like CCUS, co-firing ammonia, unproven technologically and financially, and quite problematic. Next slide, please. So there's various ways to hold companies accountable and shift them away from projects that drive climate change, many different ways. I just wanted to give one kind of interesting example that Market Forces and other organizations work on, and that's the shareholder proposal. So shareholder proposals are submitted to companies by shareholders, and every single shareholder of that company can vote on that proposal. So it's very public. It's something that the company has to pay attention to. And yeah, a good way for investors of the company to engage with the company on issues that they think are important, for example, like climate. So climate-related shareholder proposals are getting more and more common. Some of the types of asks are, for example, policy alignment with the Paris Agreement, improved climate disclosure and target setting, or net zero transition plans. Next slide, please. So I wanted to kind of talk about this example that some people might be familiar here. Of course, my Japanese colleagues and other Bangladesh civil society that's worked on the Matabari coal power projects number 1 and number 2. So this is an example of a shareholder proposal that was made mainly because of Sumitomo's coal policies, problematic coal policies, and their involvement in Matabari 1 and their refusal to get away from Matabari 2 at the time. So in terms of their coal policy, basically their coal policy was that they could make a decision on a case-by-case basis. So this meant that they could build coal power projects all over the world. So this was one of the things that we wanted to target, and also especially the Matabari, their possible involvement with Matabari 2. And in terms of the actual kind of shareholder proposal that was submitted, quite general in a way. So it was to adopt and disclose a plan outlining the company's business strategy to align its business with the goals of Paris. So this is quite, it sounds kind of generic, but the kind of point was to show that Matabari 2 is not in line with Paris. So if you have a business plan that aligns with Paris, this means that it should exclude a project like Matabari 2. Next slide, please. So in terms of shareholder proposals, actually for the proposal to be accepted by a company, usually you need about a 2/3 vote. But there can be impacts even if it doesn't pass, because a company, it has to listen to its shareholders because those are the people that have the money. So we can see that this is the first policy I'm talking about on top, which they're basically allowed to be involved in any coal power project in the world because it was on a case-by-case basis. And then after a little bit more engagement with the company around the shareholder proposal, we saw that they changed their policy so that they were only going to be involved with a loophole of Matabari 2. So they said no coal power projects except for maybe Matabari 2. And then we see after the shareholder proposal, more investor engagement. And of course, like one of the big things is that there's a context here where there was Bangladeshi civil society really working on this Matabari campaign, really highlighting the problems with Matabari 1 and also the help of NGOs all over the world, highlighting the project. And yeah, that also really had an impact with pressuring the companies as a part of this shareholder resolution. And we see in February 22, they closed the loophole so that they excluded involvement with Matabari 2. Yeah, next slide, please. So, yeah. So in terms of a just transition, of course, there's so these companies, they often tell us that, yeah, this is a just transition, like to bring fossil fuels longer into countries like Bangladesh. This is the energy that people in Bangladesh want and need. This is what the companies tell us. So this is kind of a greenwashing tactic because a just transition is kind of a cool thing to say. It sounds good and it is what we want, but the companies, I think, are kind of turning it into something where it's a way to promote fossil fuels and make a profit for themselves on the short term without considering the environmental problems, the social problems, the financial problems for the countries that they're bringing them to. So just this conference is a great forum to hear from people in Bangladesh for what a just transition really is for Bangladesh and not from the companies that are just seeking for a short-term profit. And we'll be hearing from Malu more about what communities in other places really want from a just transition, not from the companies. Thank you.
Thank you. Some of, just transition has begun to be used loosely, just as she said, and very strategically by private players to greenwash. Also, terms like net zero. Some of us who are hosting this conference are very clear that we are not talking about net zero. It's not good enough. We need to only focus on real zero goals. Private players may not be as enthusiastic, even governments are not so enthusiastic about this, but that should be our focus, I think, real zero, in our countries at least. Let us go on to another, what we think will be a very interesting presentation on especially climate finance coming not from private sector, but other players. And to take us through this will be Malu. And her presentation will be on just transition for climate vulnerable people and communities. If our people and communities are at the center, what will make just transition be possible, Malu?
Hello. Okay. Thank you very much, Vidya. And thank you very much, everyone. And good afternoon to you. I'm here with my presentation as an expression of our solidarity to the peoples and communities of Bangladesh as you face this very crucial moment of charting your own pathways for a better fossil fuel-free future. Now I'll be talking about the just transition for climate vulnerable peoples and communities. But these communities are the communities of the global south, as we call it, or the developing countries, the most vulnerable countries like Bangladesh. Okay, thank you. Okay. The urgency and the hard realities. Globally, we have now reached what we call, or what a situation which is being referred to as climate crisis or as a climate emergency. The impacts are and implications are profound. Loss of lives and livelihood, displacement of communities, and destruction of homes and infrastructure. Health, impacts on pollution, viruses, bacteria, and other organisms that cause diseases, access to food and types of food available. Climate-induced migration away from coastal areas, which is very much in Bangladesh, and flooded parts or out of islands. We also see most of the changes, impacts, implications that we say irreversible. This has a lot to do with the greenhouse gases remaining in the atmosphere hundreds of years. And of course, there are domino effects for this. Example, melting of the glaciers leading to the rise in sea levels. The world has already experienced 20 centimeters of sea level rise, which then lead to different effects on coastlines, salinity of land. Looping effects also, example, warming of the ocean causes ocean acidification, which causes more warming. Oceans are the more acidic than they have been in the last 20 years. Whatever the world does today, and in the very near term, it is inevitable that climate change will worsen before it is stabilized. I'm not scaring you, but that's how the science tells us. GHG emissions are still rising. It is not possible to do for the rate of emissions to decline immediately or for emissions to stop immediately. The transition should be rapid and just, but there is reality of material, time, and space requirements. The increase and the speed of magnitude of change is geometric, as stated in the IPCC reports. Unprecedented changes and impacts and escalation are faster than earlier predicted. There is only a small window for all of us of time left to act in order to hold on to the possibility of keeping the temperature rise below 1.5 or even 2 degrees. We have only less than a decade. We are saying 2030, we have to get rid of our coal, phase out of coal globally. Less than a decade, according to the IPCC, to prevent catastrophic climate change. If we miss this window, that possibility closes and we will have to deal with higher temperature rise. The impacts that we are experiencing today is 1.1 to 1.2 degrees Celsius increase in average temperature of the Earth since pre-industrial levels. Government pledges and plans for climate action thus far condemn us to nearly 3 degrees increase. So you may have been monitoring all these pledges, and these pledges not consistent to what they have been actually doing in their countries, these governments. So actually, what the data tell us now, that this could potentially bring us to nearly 3 degrees increase. That is, if they will even fulfill all their pledges. The just energy transition must take place immediately and must be replaced by a system that is aimed at achieving equity and justice fulfilling and protecting human rights, realizing the fullness of life in harmony with nature, and respecting the integrity of ecological systems. Now, the delivery of the climate finance for the rapid, just, and equitable energy transition in developing countries. We need huge amounts of finance necessary to deliver us to this transition. A very important undertaking that we need to do now to address the climate crisis, to address the climate emergency. Climate finance for actions, policies, and programs that address climate change. But addressing climate finance cannot be separate from addressing other issues like other aims of social transformation. So we have, you cannot, in addressing the climate finance for a just transition, you cannot separate it from addressing all other issues related to social transformation. And this involves, of course, mitigation. We need to mitigate, we need to immediately have drastic reduction in global emissions of greenhouse gases through equitable and fair sharing of efforts and a just energy transition. We need adaptation, empowering people, building resilience, adjusting to changes and impacts with irreversible ones, dealing with the loss and damage, actual as well as anticipated but unavoidable harm caused by climate change, and raising and mobilizing climate finance and technology that would be necessary. These concepts are not new concepts. These concepts are from the climate discourse and also from the concepts which have been developed through our assertions, people's assertions with our governments within the UN Climate Finance, UN Climate Conference, the Conference of Parties. Under the UNFCCC, climate finance is an agreed obligation of developed countries or the rich governments of the North to be provided for developing country, the vulnerable countries like our countries in the South. A recognition of what we say common but differentiated responsibilities. Climate finance is a new, additional, adequate, and predictable, without conditions and non-debt creating. This is how we see the climate finance flows. This climate finance slide. Next slide, please. Okay. The climate finance flows. They flow into multilateral banks like the World Bank, ADB, through private corporations as investments, bilateral through ODAs, and within the context of the UNFCCC. These are climate finance that goes to the South countries or developing countries. This climate finance, I will be focusing on the climate finance coming from the UNFCCC within the context of that. So we have three channels of climate finance. One is the Global Environment Facility for the adaptation, and the Green Climate Fund or the GCF, and the Fast Start Finance. This finance should supposed to go to the South countries for them to mitigate, to adapt, and to fund their, and for the loss and damage. Now, let's see how this climate finance flows within the UNFCCC. As most of these financial mechanisms created in 2021, you can see how slow the transfer of funds are moving and how underfinanced these commitments are, especially the finance that will go to financing the needs and the requirements of developing countries. So I won't elaborate on this. You can see how financing are being funded. From our perspective, as Asian movements and campaigners for climate finance and for climate justice, we see that climate finance is part of the fair shares and obligations of global north or rich countries of the north for global climate action based on their huge part in the historical and continuing responsibility for climate change. We also see it as part of the reparations for the huge climate debt owed to the peoples of the South for our problems that we do not create or we did not create, but bear the biggest brunt of its impacts, which we are currently facing. Climate finance, in our perspective, as movements and as communities and as peoples, we see it as a finance that should serve the purpose of rapid, just, and equitable transition. We really need to have a transition. Hello. Rapidly. As we all know, that the cause of this climate change, this climate crisis, and all the problems that we are facing right now is heavily due to fossil fuel energy system. That climate change is fueled or created or caused by 70 to 80% of greenhouse gas emissions. So we really need to do a rapid transition. When we mean by rapid, it is conducted at a pace consistent by the requirements of keeping global temperature below 1.5 degrees Celsius. We really need to push for a just transition at a minimum that must ensure it addresses poverty and the basic energy needs of the people and communities, provision for alternative quality and sustainable jobs, livelihood, essential services. Benefits of the transition are justly shared and serves and is part of the process of transformation towards just, equitable, and sustainable economies and economic relations. The transformation is so huge that we really need to do. Impacts are so deep. Lives have been lost and opportunities for our own development is nowhere to be seen. So we really need to have not only rapid, but a kind of just transition that addresses the needs of our people and our communities for development. It should be equitable. Equitable based on fair shares to account the differentiated responsibilities for climate change across countries because all countries share the same atmosphere. All countries have their responsibility with the greenhouse gas, with the climate crisis, across classes and sections of the population, corporations and institutions versus people and communities. Equity is very important as the share in emission reductions, delivery of climate finance is based on this equity, and issue of fair shares. Now you can see in this chart, in table 1, the historical emissions of developed countries as opposed to developing countries. You can see how the share of the pie of the developed countries is big enough as compared to the developing countries. And if you look at the equal individual shares of developed countries of the North and developing countries of the Global South, the Global South is bigger. That is the share of the historical emission per is being placed on the developing countries who carry the burden of the impacts and the responsibility of this GHG. Yeah. Considering that they have emit less in terms of GHG. Now, responsibility for climate change, role of across countries, within countries, globally and across countries, corporations and controlled governments also differ. Now, we are saying that the developed countries have the role, have the responsibility and obligation for climate finance. And have responsibility, so developing countries will have its transition to just and equitable transition. But it is also important to note the role of governments. Yeah, the role of governments. The role of governments should play a central role in the managed transition by developing laws and policies and direct and manage the process. It cannot and never shall be left to markets and the private sector. The role of the government is also to direct the direct transition to 100% renewable energy system. We don't rely on other governments, we don't rely on corporations that they will do the direct transition to 100% RE. To ensure that it will not, the transition will not be a bridge or transition or carry transition fuels or cleaner transition fuels, unreliable CC carbon capture technologies, hydrogen, ammonia, and other false solutions. Now, issues and challenges. As we may have been engaging with the governments in the UNFCCC with all these commitments, pledges, and responsibilities and obligations of the countries of the North, still very low pledges of developed countries, and there is non-delivery of even these very low pledges. And mostly, this financing are accompanied by loans, accompanied by conditionalities, and the vulnerable countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan, and other countries in the V20 are forced to take responsibility in handling or dealing with their climate issues by way of South-South cooperation. So these are the issues and challenges that we face right now. And yeah, and 2 more slides. Yeah, and then, yeah. And we, of course, our continuing fight for the urgent need to scale up climate finance. We have several things that we should consider in continuing this fight. from the lens of the civil society. One is promoting and ensuring public investments to ensure the urgency, effectively and urgent transition to renewable energy. Governments should lead the management and regulation. Number two, provision for adequate, predictable, and grants-based climate finance, cancellation of unsustainable and illegitimate debts, especially debts from fossil fuel projects, and shifting of subsidies away from fossil fuels and to stop false solutions. Now, under these conditions, we rely and we have to rely on the public funds. It is only through these public funds that we can ensure, we can guarantee that our pathway to 100% renewable energy and that our transition to be just, equitable, and rapid will be ensured by this financing that is coming from the public. Thank you very much, and yeah.
Thank you, Malu. You really took us through where the finance should come from, how it should come, why it should come from there, because of the historical responsibility of the global north towards the global south, and countries like Bangladesh that are particularly vulnerable to the ill impacts of what the global north has done until now. Thank you. That was very comprehensive, and I think especially the young people in the room will really benefit from that presentation. Thank you, Malu. Malu is from the Philippines that that has always, had to deal with climate change impacts, more typhoons and stuff like that. Of course, in Bangladesh, we are old hands at dealing with disasters, but it has a real toll on communities, on livelihoods, on people's lives. Thank you. And now for what most of us have been really waiting for, a critique of the IEP MP, and of course the lens is the Paris Agreement. It already looks like we've lost the battle and we won't be able to keep to 1.5. That's my thought. There are some who are very hopeful. But yes, but let's see where we are in terms of the master plan for Bangladesh and how JAXIS in Japan is looking at it, because remember, it's JICA that's put it together for us. So let's hear from Marika Kita.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me, coordinator and organizer. I'm the Marika Kita from JAXIS, based in Japan. So JAXIS is a Japanese environmental NGO, and I am monitoring the JICA-supported IEPMP. So today I will speak about the proposed IEPMP and its consistency with the Paris Agreement. I know that so many presentations had already covered about IEPMP, so I hope I can add some Japanese kind of aspects to you. Yeah, could you move to the next slide, please? Yes. So it's the project overview. So as you had already know that the IEPMP is a project supported by JICA as a part of Technical Cooperation for Development Planning, and the Institute of Energy Economics Japan, which is IEJ, it's the Japan's energy think tank, is taking charge of its investigation. And JICA previously conducted similar kinds of master plans in 2010 and in 2016. And also the previous master plan was hugely added fossil-based energy capacity to Bangladesh, and it caused overcapacity issue and capacity payment issue. So and also the fossil fuel dependency and overcapacity have a risk to lock out renewable energy in Bangladesh. Next slide, please. Yeah, so I will speak about the problematic points of the IEPMP. So you already know that, but JICA's recommended scenario is not aligned with 1.5 degrees goals. Yeah, so the last year in Elmar, G7 ministry committed to end direct international public financing of fossil fuels by the end of 2022, except in the limited circumstances clearly defined by each country consistent with 1.5 warming limit and the goals of the Paris Agreement. So this means that any kind of Japan's public energy support for the developing countries must be aligned with the 1.5 degree goals. And so any kinds of master plan that JICA provides its support must be consistent with the Paris Agreement. So however, the JICA's recommended scenario in the draft IEPMP is based on the assumption that the Bangladesh will achieve the carbon neutrality by around 2070. So it's not consistent with the Paris Agreement. The next slide, please. Yeah. And JICA's recommended scenario is based on the premise that 2050 is a year for Bangladesh to become the decarbonization ready. So it's not fully decarbonized. And so when you look at the energy mix in 2050, so you can see that the fossil fuel-based energy will account for around 60% of an energy mix in 2050. So you can see, I know you can see the details because the figure is so small. The red and pink parts of the graph shows the gas-based energy. So yeah, so it accounts for almost 60%. Next slide, please. Yeah, so yeah, I know you already know it, but JICA didn't interpret Prime Minister Hasina's statement at COP26 correctly. So the Hasina announced at COP26 that we hope to have 40% of our energy from renewable sources by 2041. So, however, when we look at the draft of IEPMP, it mentions that Prime Minister Hasina declared to raise clean energy ratio in the power generation mix to 40% by 2041. So JICA is actually replacing the word renewable energy to clean energy. So yeah, next slide, please. Yes. So the third issue is that JICA underestimates the amount of renewable energy introduced by 2050. So this graph shows the amount of renewable energies introduced in 2050 in the JICA's recommended scenario. And JICA estimated to achieve 18 gigawatts of solar energy and 20 gigawatts of wind energy. Next slide, please. Yeah, so however, when we look at the preparatory survey on Matabari Phase 2, it's also conducted by JICA. We can see that JICA estimated to achieve 15 gigawatts of solar and 15 gigawatts of wind power by 2041. So JICA actually underestimates the amount of renewable energy introduced in the IEPMP. And also the another research shows that code 100 renewable energy from Bangladesh shows that the Bangladesh has 150 gigawatts potential of wind energy, including both onshore and offshore, and 119 gigawatts of solar energy. So we can see that so many other research shows research estimate more the capacity of renewable energy than planned in IEPMP. So that's the problem. And JICA places its main reliance on imported fossil-based energy, which will weaken the Bangladesh's energy security. So Bangladesh has already experienced the energy crisis driven by Russian invasion of Ukraine. So if another energy crisis happen, so the consumer will be impacted by the power cut and the expensive power tariff. Next slide, please. So the fourth issue is optimistic assumption on introducing ammonia hydrogen co-firing. So the JICA estimates to introduce 20% hydrogen co-firing will start around 2035 and 20% ammonia co-firing around 2030, 50% of ammonia co-firing around 2035. So it means that in 2041, it will achieve hydrogen co-firing at 6% and ammonia co-firing at 2% in the energy mix. So actually, before that, the JICA drew the scenario to achieve 20% ammonia co-firing by 2030. And in the meeting with JICA and JAXES, we told JICA staff that it's so unrealistic, and the JICA revised their plan. Next slide, please. Yeah. So we can see that JICA estimates huge introduction of both ammonia and hydrogen co-firing up to 2050. So the issue is JICA ignore high cost of these technologies, and Bloomberg, a study by Bloomberg NEF estimates the generation cost of ammonia will be 500 to 800 per ton. However, JICA estimates it will be cheaper, and also the JICA's estimates lacks economic rationality, as the JICA estimates in the draft IEPMP that the generation cost of co-firing will be higher than those of renewable energy. Next slide, please. Yes. So actually, the ammonia hydrogen co-firing should not be considered as clean energy. So JICA ignored the issue of carbon budget of co-firing technologies. So yeah, so when we look at the IEPMP, JICA doesn't describe what energy source will be used to produce ammonia, which is used for co-firing. And the study by EIA shows that gray ammonia produced using unabated fossil fuel is equal to double the emissions associated with the direct combustion of coal. And the research by Transition Zero mentions that the emission from a 20% ammonia co-firing rate as a present feasible technology is equal to double that of gas combined cycle plants. So it's not totally a clean energy that JICA suggested. And also, so the Japanese government is pushing to promote co-firing technology under green transformation policy, which is called GX policy in Japan. So the Japanese government is trying to promote this kind of co-firing technologies, as well as CCS and LNG as a clean energy. And at the momentum of G7, it is greatly objected by United Kingdom, France, and Canada. Next slide, please. So I would like to conclude that JICA should follow the G7 commitment and adopt the net zero scenario, which estimates 28 gigawatts of solar and 55 gigawatts of wind energy by 2050, as a recommended scenario, not advanced technology scenario, and revise the optimistic assumption of introducing ammonia hydrogen co-firing, and should establish a plan which enables Bangladesh to achieve net zero, even if the introduction of this ammonia hydrogen co-firing technology will fail, and apply the policy stated above, not only in the support of Bangladesh, but also in the support of Energy Master Plan in other countries such as Indonesia. Yes, thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Marika. Now we've been through the three presentations. After this, we have the two eminent guests, one the chair, one the guest of honor, to address us. Since this is the afternoon session, I think our three presentations deserve a hand. And how shall we do it? That's the very conventional way. Do you have no other way of clapping your hands? This way. Okay, let's do it the Donna way. This is the Zoom clap, right, Donna? Where you don't make too much of a noise. But you know, yesterday we had some wonderful showers, right? Suddenly welcome showers. And how does the rain go? That's another way of clapping, with one finger. Let's hear it. I'm not going to do it on the mic. Let's hear it. The one finger, Malu. And then two. And then three. Faster. 3, 4, and 5. Rizwana Hassan to the mic. Keep on going, otherwise she won't come here.
All my secrets are out. Thank you very much. But every time I come to an energy meeting, I learn a lot. Whatever points I have in mind before coming here, I lose all my points and I start thinking about new points. We are talking about climate change and energy transition here in this session, and both are actually justice issues. Both climate change and energy transition are justice issues, while justice issues around climate change have taken definite global faces. Energy transition, the justice issues in the energy transition has different faces in different parts of the world. While someone coming from India might think that our government is already doing very well in terms of renewables, in the case of Bangladesh, the case is perhaps not the same. So we all know, with the second presentations, the justice issues in the climate change scenario, the need for adaptation, mitigation, fund, technology. Every country has unique situation with regard to justice in its energy sector. Just one point for the first presenter. In Bangladesh, because of the unreliability in energy supply from the government sector, some private entrepreneurs have invested in renewable to get their own energy supply. The Korean EPZ remains an example, and some of the garment industries that are 100% export oriented, they have also announced their plan to go renewable, 100% renewable, so that they don't have to rely on the grid system for supply of energy. Why do we say that climate change and energy transition are both justice issues? Because they both refer to the consumption pattern that we follow, the inequities in the consumption pattern, and the inequities and the exploitative model in the production pattern. I don't think Bangladesh has a clear vision for its energy. I don't think Bangladesh, and I think with each passing year, the stand of the government is getting even more confused. So we first heard the Prime Minister making a commitment as the chair of the Vulnerable Forum in the climate negotiation platform that Bangladesh will try to go 100% renewable by 2050. Then we hear that Bangladesh will go 40% renewable by 2040. And then we see JICA developing a plan where the target has even lowered. So I don't really think we have a very clear target on renewable. Whether it's 20% or 30% or 40% or 50%, for us to attack it, for us to raise the level, we don't know what we are fighting against. Is it 20 or is 40 or is 100%? I think both the climate change realities and the energy transition, they have their global dimension, because the fossil fuel companies will be chasing the dollars here in Bangladesh also. So even if the government of Bangladesh wants to go for 80% renewable, there are global players who would want Bangladesh to still be in the fossil fuel industry so that their companies don't go out of business. And they will say that Bangladesh emits the least. It does not have to go for mitigation. Bangladesh does not have to go for mitigation when it comes to the global play, but for the sake of its own air pollution, it has to learn to mitigate. The Bangladesh air is the worst polluted in the world. We can't afford to have more coal-based power plants to add to that pollution. It is not for mitigation, it is for controlling your own air pollution and giving your people an air that is breathable. So it is the public interest of the population that a government has to take into consideration. Accountability, as has been rightly pointed out, remains a key element of this justice scenario. We have to have the right policies in hand. Bangladesh does not have an approved coal policy. The government is confused because people there do not want open mining. The government feels coal is cheap because the government does not take into consideration the health impact and the environmental impact and the social impact of coal-based power plants. So the government does not have very clear-cut policies in the energy sector that can be complementary and that can tell me what the government has as its vision in the energy sector. There has to be institutions that are equally empowered. The agencies of Bangladesh that work in the energy sector, I don't think are on equal footing. I understand that the other speakers have talked about creating a level playing field for the renewable and fossil fuel industry, but within the ministry itself, there are agencies who are more powerful than other agencies. SREDA, I think, is the least politically favored agency in the entire energy ministry. We don't have our own capacity. We haven't built our own capacity. We have surrendered to the prescription of the foreign companies. Foreigners come here, do the exploration. We had the capacity to do the exploration, but we haven't done that. That is an argument for the fossil industry, I understand, but that also could have saved so much of dollars that the taxpayers have to pay from their own pockets. Now, let's talk about some concrete example in the fossil industry. When we talk about accountability, we have to have people's participation. There has to be reliability in the sector. The prospect has to be judged. There has to be relief and redress given to the community, which we don't have here in Bangladesh. Take the example of Rampal. Who did not oppose it? Even UNESCO opposed it. But Rampal has gone into operation. I met a young climate activist this morning who was here also, Hasib from Khulna. He said it creates so much of noise in the industry, in the power plant, that it is becoming unbearable and the coal is dumped in the open, so the emission is there. But the government takes pride in the fact that it has a coal-based power plant near the Sundarbans, which, as per the government, does not pollute. So in Rampal, there was a case in the court, and there was an injunction from the High Court. And then one party, when the government went to the court saying that, my lord, the head of government from India will be coming to Bangladesh. Agreements will have to be signed. If the stay is there, if the injunction is there, the agreement cannot be signed. So the injunction was lifted. An injunction that was given on legal grounds was lifted on political ground. And the injunction never came back. Rampal is there. On Bashkhali, there has been incidents of killing. A coal-based power plant, before coming into operation, has managed to kill 12 people, and the 12 people, including the locals and the laborers, were killed by the law enforcing agencies because they opposed, because they demanded fair working environment. And they were killed. And these are documented by the government itself, not by any NGO. In this same Bashkhali power plant, a person who gave a very benign post that this is a development that we don't want. He did not even mention the project. He just said this is the development that we don't want. I urge all the youngsters of this area to hold pen and oppose this model of development. He was given a case under the Digital Security Act when there was a court order saying that the police should not be harassing the locals. But then again, the case was filed. Within 2 hours of filing of the case, he was arrested. And some of us had hard time in bringing him out. He even lost his job. That was a very benign post. He did not even mention the name of the project. Now, let's go back to Paira. It's being said that with Paira, the Ilsha Sanctuary, the national fish of Bangladesh, 2 sanctuaries will be very badly impacted. Then, let's talk about Matarbari. For creating a road to the plant, a river. Our rivers are rivers. Our rivers are not canals. Our rivers are rivers. They have got flows. They have got tidal surges, have been filled up. We went to the High Court. The High Court gave a stay, which was stayed by the Appellate Division, which meant that the road stays. And it is the same judiciary that says that rivers are living beings. And if you do anything that kills a river, you can be charged with a criminal offense. But we have not yet been able to remove that road from the Kohelia River. On Adani and Gadda, I think I've crossed my limit. Not in terms of time, but in terms of how much power I can actually exercise as a citizen of this country. So you see, newspapers are flooded with reports, with analysis that Bangladesh will be loser in terms of, in economic terms, will be paying much more. We will not be availing all the tax exemption that Adani is getting in India. We have not been able to strike the deal in a way that it will be economically feasible and profitable and something acceptable for Bangladesh. But who is to question it and where? So when we talk about accountability, it's not only having the right policy and right institution in place, which also unfortunately we don't have. We don't ensure that people participate in the decision making. We don't take decisions that are reliable. And during the Ukraine and Russia war, we have seen that we had to switch to LNG, and due to the volatility in the LNG market, we had to pay huge amount of money to get basic supply of electricity at a time when we have overcapacity. So we have overcapacity and we have load shedding. These are the 2 realities we are dealing with at the same time. And we know that there are international agencies who have said that the amount of money that Bangladesh has invested in fossil fuel industry, it could use the same amount and could get energy from sources that are local. You don't have to rely on the global market in prices that are affordable. Of course, there are technological challenges, but those can also be addressed. in terms of redress and relief, I don't think we have administrative relief. I don't think we have judicial relief. If we really want to question energy policies that we think are economically not viable, socially destructive, and environmentally extremely dangerous. This particular master plan that we are talking about is being drafted in English. To expect people to give its opinion on it is not something very practical. People in Bangladesh don't speak English. We all speak Bangla. So if the government really wants a master plan in which it will be investing people's money, government does not have its own money. There's nothing called government money. It's our money, my money, the money that I pay as tax. The government will be investing our money. The government would better consult the people. That is not going to happen. You can't have public opinion on a piece of paper, on a policy document that's written in English. So we would definitely urge JICA and its Bangladeshi counterpart to take the initiative to at least prepare a summary of the policy document in Bangla so that mass people can give its comment. The Paris Agreement, to me itself, is a problematic thing. On adaptation, yes, we always keep on hammering on fund, but how much fund will solve your problem? If we do not mitigate, if we do not change the energy production scenario, if we do not move from fossil to renewable, then 1/3 of Bangladesh will go under. How much money will solve the problem of you losing a significant part of your land, that you or your next generation will be drawing the map of Bangladesh differently? How much money can solve that problem? So we have to really bring in change in our lifestyle, and that is where the justice issue comes in. If the Western communities, they do not compromise on their luxurious lifestyle, if we do not do the development narrative in a different way, we will not be able to solve the problem. So I think climate change and energy justice both impact on our social rights, our right to hold land, both impact on our economic rights, both impact our environmental rights, and of late, because the government imposes its policies and plans on the people, on energy, it has started to impact our political rights. Our right to say no, our right to oppose are also being restricted. Anyone who opposes the Rupur power plant is someone who is standing against the development of Bangladesh. That is not correct. A country that has not been able to manage its municipal solid waste is thinking of managing nuclear waste. One doesn't have to be a scientist to understand. You know, the faulty arguments in favor of this power plant. The question is whether we could have the same amount of electricity by investing in the renewables or even by importing from India and Nepal. Whether we could do that. Are we allowed to have that debate in the country? Perhaps not. So climate change and energy justice, if you want justice in the climate sector, if you want justice in the energy sector, we have to be politically vibrant. We have to be really engaging just the way we are engaging today. But I think we have to take it to a wider group of people so that the government actually feels the pulse of the people. It's not only in Bangladesh that we can't criticize the government's projects in the energy sector. Even in India, a very good friend of mine, Ritik Datta, who has been opposing coal-based power plants, his license has been cancelled. He has been given one case under the Income Tax Ordinance or Act, because they don't have martial laws there in India. So under the Income Tax Act, and also under the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. So we are having hard time. Those who are advocating for climate justice and energy justice, we are having hard time, but we are not to give in. We will be telling the government that, and we'll be urging the government to engage with us, to listen to our concerns, and to ensure that the plan the government comes up with is equally owned by the 18 crore people of Bangladesh. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Rizwana Hassan, as usually, brings a lot of clarity and, she inspires us to act now. Many of us have been uncomfortable with the IEPMP, the Power Master Plan. I think this is the third draft, right, that is out right now. Fourth. So fourth draft. While people's participation hasn't been forthcoming so much or hasn't been encouraged, there have been 3, redrafts of the master plan. While they might now try to follow due process, like Rizwana Hassan has said, and bring out a Bengali version of it, we are not very sure that the public will have another stab at this document. What then should we be focusing on? How do we see that this document that we think is fatally flawed? Marika also brought to us what were the flaws in the document. This was discussed even yesterday. Our guest of honor has clearly said they haven't followed due process even under the Bangladesh law. Forget about international jurisprudence in this regard. What can the people of Bangladesh now do? I think through this conference, and I submitted to you, Jyotirmaida, that what we have been trying to do is actually taking a fresh look in public, bringing parliamentarians and policy makers here to listen to the people, to listen to civil society voices, to listen to experts, to listen to young people, and engage. And if through this process, by tomorrow, if the plenaries, really bring out a strong call that we must not go through with this version of the IEPMP, I think that will be a very strong stand that we can collectively take. And the kind of effort that the man coming up and others have put into this 3-day conference will really be rewarded if we can bring out that strong statement by tomorrow that is supported by the climate parliamentarians, Climate Parliament Bangladesh, the parliamentarians who are with us. Then that'll be fantastic, I think. And I think we should push very hard so that by tomorrow, hopefully we can actually think, can we now shelve this? This is not working. Well, we activists, we're always dreamers. We always think of the best case scenario. That's what fuels us. So let's look at best case scenario. Also, I think our guest of honor made some very important points. Rampal has already gone on board. Not enough noise about the Adani deal with Bangladesh. And really, we had our best chance in January and February to really put pressure to see that the deal was off in some way. We may still have the chance. Adani has verbally assured that they will not go as per the old expensive rate that they were going to give us power. They have said that we won't be more expensive than Rampal, etc. But that is also not good enough. What we have seen in our country, like she spoke of Ritwik, but even like the Adani plant where I live in India, we got a very good order where they had to pay reparations to local communities and the environment that was impacted by their thermal power plant. But it's a year and a half now. They haven't paid that pittance. You know how rich Adani is and how much richer he made himself through the pandemic and through his closeness with the Indian government. And yet he will not pay that pittance to farmers who live around the plant, who haven't been able to conduct their agriculture. Their water is polluted by his plant, but he is not paid up. So we have to again go to the courts to try and see that he pays up that piddling amount, and we think it should be many more times larger. So Adani is a difficult fish to take to even the courts. He's difficult to catch. He's very slippery. He has people who will throw him right back into the sea where he loves to swim. And the world is his sea, not just Australia, India, Bangladesh, but now it's opening up for him across the world. So redress and reparations for the environment, for the communities impacted, for the workers of Baanshkhali and other such plant, that is a big struggle that people in this room need to keep their nose, ahead for. There are many questions that even Rizwana Appa, put before us. The fragmented vision of the powers that be in our country, in Bangladesh, and therefore how their mission is, they are not very focused in their mission. Jyotirmoy Barua, what are your thoughts? As chairperson of this whole session, you've heard 3 very enlightening presentations, and our advocate Rizwana Hassan put forth a really problematic scenario. What do you think should be the way forward?
Thank you, Vidya, and thank you, the organizers, and our eminent guest, and the guest of honor. The discussion was really very thought-provoking, and all 3 presenters, our eminent guests, given a vivid picture of the actual issues concerned just transition, and our guest of honor clearly uttered the word energy justice. When we are talking about the just transition, we are basically thinking about the energy justice, which has taken its place around the world now. When we used to think about the energy right, which essentially include uninterrupted supply or access to the energy only, but when we are talking about the energy justice, we are thinking about accessibility, we are thinking about our participation into the decision-making process, and then to equitable shares and distribution of the harm created by the production of this energy process. So from the 3 presentations, what we have seen, from the first one presented by Meg, she emphasized on the role of the private sector in just transition. If you have noticed from her presentation that some of the big corporations like Mitsubishi, Sumitomo, and many other like General Electric, GE, JICA, and many other corporations are involved in this energy transition process, and they are involved in energy production. So how can we basically make them accountable in this process, just to transform into the renewable energy instead of heavily relying on the fossil fuel? That was my concern when I was listening to all the 3 presentations, and Rizwana Hassan clearly given an idea how the legal structure, legal attempts are basically failing in our country. She has clearly stated there was an injunction order from the High Court Division, which has been lifted afterwards on the political points of view. So this is the scenario we have. The legal protection in the country from these national corporations, bad investment or the investment into the fossil fuels, there is no specific law to prevent them. As you might remember, there was a prominent case in Bangladesh against the World Bank's investment in Bangladesh. There was an immunity bill has been introduced that was back in, so far I remember, in 2004. And a case in the High Court Division was lost to challenge that this immunity cannot be given to the World Bank. And High Court necessarily intervened in that particular case, and World Bank does not have any immunity in their investment in the country. So they cannot invest, for example, in the fossil fuel or destroying the environment of this country. But what about JICA? Do we have it in our country in place? Do we have any law? What about ADB? What about their investment? What is happening with their investment in the country? If any other transnational corporations like Sumitomo is investing in Matarbari Phase 2, so do we have any legal instruments at all? What other process we can think of? That is what I was mainly concerned of. As you might be aware, there is a consultation process is going on in the UN at the moment on the legally binding treaty on business and trans corporations in terms of human rights. And last year they had their 8th session, and I had the opportunity to attend this consultation process, and where the participating countries reviewed the third revised draft, and the 4th revised draft is already on the web for reviewing by the countries. And in that particular instrument, what this UN instrument is talking about, if I emphasize on 4 specific points they are concerned about, it is also way out. The solutions we are talking here will give some lights onto those things. If I summarize 4 key points from the legally binding treaty on human rights, business and human rights, they basically emphasize on the 4 issues like their business operations, the transnational corporations, business operations, products or service causing or worsening climate change. For example, by generating greenhouse gases or contributing to the destruction of carbon sinks that absorb greenhouse gases, for instance, by converting forests to farms. Second concern should be their business operations, products and services increasing vulnerability and reducing resilience to climate change. Mitigation actions taken by the business to minimize future climate change and to respond to transition risk. For example, by exiting carbon-intensive investments, switching from fossil fuel-based energy to renewable energy, or buying carbon offsets. The 4th one is adaptation actions taken by the businesses to respond to the physical risk and impact on climate change. So they clearly emphasized on this transition process to the renewable energy. So when we are failing to make all these transnational corporations accountable in our country like Bangladesh, or the most vulnerable countries, worst affected countries of this energy production issues regarding the carbon emission and other issues, health risks, and in our second presentation, we have seen the impacts where basically, including the health risks, it was stated in that we were also facing the internal displacement as well. If we consider the Matarbari project, internal displacement, if you see, there are over 35,000 people have been displaced from this particular area, but no concern has ever raised in the countrywide or globally. That 35,000 people lost their lives, their livelihoods, their all sorts of sources of income, everything. But government did not take any responsibility to rehabilitate all these people. And surprisingly, other losses like loss of personal properties as well. And we have a law in 2017, if the government takes over the property of a private individual, then they are supposed to give compensation to the people. But when it comes to Matarbari, we clearly remember most of the people did not even get a single penny. I see few people sitting over there from the Paira area who also did not receive a single penny for losing their lands and their homesteads. So even having a particular law does not necessarily guarantee that we are going to get legal protection on those particular issues when there are clearly serious imbalance of power, which has been pointed out very vividly by the guest of honor, Rizwan Hassan, that there is no balance of power in the country. We do not have the tool to push them. But how we can do it? UN binding treaty could be an option, but that is yet to be finalized. So far, I had the idea from my last session on the 8th session that it might yet take 4 to 5 years to finalize the binding treaty. Maybe. So there was a guess that some people said it might take 5 years, or some were for another 10 years probably. So we do not have a very strong legal instrument to force these transnational corporations to not to invest on the fossil fuel-based power production and to transit into the renewable energy. But in terms of our legal, national legal structure, we have a authority or the commission, says Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission. That has become useless for the last couple of months now, because government, it used to be the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission before to decide the prices or the accessibility of the energy to the people. People had a say in this price fixing process, because according to section 22 and 34 of that, they are supposed to hold a public hearing and listen to the stakeholders before fixing a price or reviewing a price. But that power has been taken away few months back by the government, saying that for tackling the emergency situation, the government can fix the price without holding any public hearing or without asking any other person. Despite having these laws since 2003, the government had been fixing the prices of petroleum products. They never ever allowed Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission to fix the price of petroleum products. How come? The government was the violator of the law, clearly. Now they are saying, now what they are doing now, they are basically taking the role of the upstream energy controller and the businessman. Some government organizations taking the name of company, for example, the Bangladesh Petroleum Corporation, though it is a corporation, it's a public limited corporation, and some other public limited companies, they even doing business with us, though Bangladesh has the commitment or the place in the constitution that they are not going to make profit with their own people. By way of forming this sort of corporations or companies, they are making profit from the people. They are running those corporations, companies like private limited companies, to make profit out of the people's investment onto this energy mix. And now when they made these recent amendments to the law saying that they can exercise this power instead of allowing the BERC or the Bangladesh Energy Regulatory Commission to do it, basically we are left with no legal protection at all, because earlier we had a option to participate in the price fixing process by way of taking part into the public hearing and saying that, okay, yes, this is what you are supposed to do. We could even make our written submissions before them to consider our arguments. But this opportunity has also been taken away. So the ministry itself, the energy ministry, can itself fix the price of any energy now. So when we are talking about the just transition for establishing the energy justice, in reality, Bangladesh is committing for the 100% transition into the renewable energy. But in reality, what they are doing, they are taking away all the rights to get access to this energy, which is the main theme of the energy justice. They are taking away this right from the people. So that's why we definitely need more effective and implementable solutions to get hold of this energy right of these people of this country. It is not about Bangladesh, though the program is designed to emphasize on the situations relating to the energy situation in Bangladesh, but this is obviously a global issue. You will find similarity in many other countries except few, probably the rich countries who have absolute control over their energy transition process. I'm not going to take longer, and again I will thank all the three eminent participants for their valuable input into the just transition process and the role of other actors in this particular field. And I give special thanks to our special guest of honor for enlightening us, taking us through the legal process and other pressing issues where basically power imbalance is playing a vital role, not allowing us to have the power to say which we wanted to say or access to the energy energy on this Bangladesh Past Festival. So I thank you all. Thank you again to the organizers, and thank you again to the friends who are listening to this particular program. Thank you.
Thank you, Barrister Jyotirmoy Barua. That was a very thoughtful response by the chair. And I know I should have thrown open the floor just before the chair spoke, but I'm doing it thereafter so that we can even ask Barrister some questions, or you can comment on even what he said. So here you are, the three speakers, the guest of honor, and the chair at your disposal in case you want to make comments, ask questions. There. Would you take the mic to that gentleman? Prince? After that young man, who else would like to? Another young man and another young man. What about a young woman? Yes. Okay. Not a young woman. Okay, a not so young woman. And then some less. Okay, no, the gentleman who's standing. Yes. ঠিক আছে.
Hello, hello everyone. I am Idishri Chandra Bishwas, and I am 16 years old, a climate advocate working for climate justice with YouthNet Global. So I want to ask that how can we ensure that the indigenous peoples and the local community are included in decision-making processes related to energy transition and benefit from it? Yeah, and that is my question.
Thank you. We'll take another 2 or 3 questions and then, yes, this gentleman here. Prince, 1 second. Prince, we'll go by when they, here, this gentleman. Yes.
Hello everyone, thank you for giving me the floor. I want to know, as JICA has already invested in Matarbari 1 and they have refrained themselves from investing in Matarbari 2, but Matarbari 1 still exists and operates. So what's JICA doing in order to ensure that we can mitigate from the damages that is being done from Matarbari 1, and how is JICA going to help us to increase our renewable energy support? Thank you.
Oh, thank you. My question is, can we really blame the foreign private investors? Because they will invest wherever they see profits, and that's the ultimate goal of a business entities, to profit. They don't really care about climate changes. We can raise our voices and call them hypocrites or whatever, but that won't really stop from investing if our government is not strong on its policies and laws. And my second question is, as our third speaker said, that JICA isn't following the Paris agreements on its investments. So, as far as I know, that there is no penalties if a signed country does not oblige by the agreement. So, what is the good coming from these agreements? If there is any penalties of that, how can the private investors be held accountable when the government don't have anything to do with the investments? Thank you.
Okay. We've had 4 questions. Why don't you come in on round 2 so that we don't forget? Okay. Yes. I'll leave it open. Any of the questions on indigenous people and how they could participate effectively and not get the hard end of the stick. On Matarbari, what is JICA doing? How will they contribute to the RE journey of Bangladesh? Foreign private investors, how can we expect them not to push for profits, but actually work for the good of Bangladesh and for renewables? Isn't it the government's responsibility? And of course, the Paris Agreement, no penalties. How do we even implement it? Take your pick. Yes. Arekta mic nei?
Yeah, so about the Matarbari 1 question. So after the Sumitomo withdrew from Matabari 2, the Japanese government had announced to end its support for Matabari 2. But the Matabari 1 is under the construction, and I got the report from the staff in Action 8 that so many impacted people in Matabari are suffering that because they didn't get compensation enough. And also so many people has been displaced because of the project, and some children has already died because due to the traffic accident because of the construction of the access road. So we are continue the discussion with JICA staff. Yeah. So and also 2 days later, we plan to go to Matabari 1 construction site, so I will check the present status. Yes.
Okay, thank you. And on RE, that question about JICA and RE, or do you want to take that, Meg? Okay.
So question about what?
Didn't you also ask whether JICA will be focusing, was it you? Yeah, on RE. How do you expect, what role will it play with, yeah.
The role of the JICA?
Yeah, yeah. Do you expect JICA to be really pushing for renewables in Bangladesh? What is the role you think JICA can play there?
Yeah, I think JICA needs to push more their work on the renewable energy, but I'm sorry, but I haven't looked up the JICA's project on renewable energy, so I'm not sure the details, but clearly the JICA needs to phase out the fossil fuel energy, yeah.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
That's fine. Thank you, Marika. So, মানে মাতারবাড়িতে যেটা হচ্ছে যে জাইকার ভূমিকাটা বিশেষত জাকসেসের যে অ্যাডভোকেসি সেটার কারণে কমিউনিটি বেশ কিছু বেনিফিট পেয়েছে, কিন্তু রিয়েলি মানে একটা এফেক্টেড কমিউনিটি বা ওখানে যে ধরনের প্রজেক্টের কারণে যে ধরনের ইম্প্যাক্ট আছে লোকালি, সেইটার সম্পূর্ণ ক্ষতিপূরণ তো হয় না আসলে, যতটুকু হয়েছে সেটা মোটামুটি, বাট স্টিল দেয়ার ইজ হিউজ গ্যাপস। অ্যান্ড জাইকা কোনো কমিটমেন্ট নাই যে তারা ওখানে ফেজ 2 যেটা তারা ক্যান্সেল করেছে সেখানে তারা রিনিউয়েবল করবে, এরকম কোনো কমিটমেন্ট জাইকা করেনি, এবং গভর্নমেন্টেরও স্টিল কোনো প্ল্যান ওখানে নাই, ডিক্লেয়ার্ড প্ল্যান নাই যে ওই খালি জায়গাটাতে তারা রিনিউয়েবল করবে। ইট ওয়াজ ইউর কোয়েশ্চেন? ওকে, থ্যাংক ইউ।
Thank you. Thank you. Here. 300 megawatt or solar panels. Solar 300 megawatt solar bolche dekhi. All the biggest sharks you have in Bangladesh, right?
Yeah.
Huh. Now, Malu wants to add.
JICA as a financial institution of Japanese government, and as Japanese government having that obligation and responsibility to pay for its obligation to the developing countries, so that developing countries should mitigate, adapt, and take the pathway for transition. I'm saying that because I think the Japanese government, being part of the country from the global north, with that obligation, can provide climate financing more than just financing one renewable energy project. So I think when it comes to JICA, it should be accompanied by pushing Japan to pay for its responsibility and obligation to the peoples of the South. especially
Yeah.
Bangladesh.
Important point. Thanks, Malu. Marika, would you pass the mic on to Rizwana Appa? Yes.
On the question of participation of the indigenous people, see, if I may say so, the mainstream Bangladeshis can hardly participate. Participation for the indigenous people becomes even more difficult. They won't even read Bangla. Even if the document is translated into Bangla, they won't be even reading Bangla. But of course, when the government talks about mainstreaming the indigenous people in the development process, there should be mechanism for doing that. Good that you raised the question, because I forgot to mention one thing. When we talk about accountability in the energy sector and redress and relief for the affected communities, or someone who doesn't believe in or doesn't have much confidence in the given development narrative of the government, one way of doing questioning it could be the environmental and social impact assessment. Nowadays they're talking about environmental, social and human rights assessment. When some of us asked for EIA reports of some of the energy projects, the Department of Environment and the Power Board, if I remember it correctly, but the Department of Environment for sure, refused to provide us with a copy of the environmental impact assessment on the ground that environmental impact assessment reports are intellectual property documents. Now, I said the ground that you have given is so unacceptable that if I go to any international platform and tell people that after 50 years of Stockholm Declaration, after 30 years of Rio Declaration, my government now thinks that environmental impact assessment reports are intellectual property documents, I mean, how would I say that? It is too much of an embarrassment for me. So the EIA document, if that is made public, many of us could give our comments on it. So এখন we have to take on another round of fight. We have to go to the High Court to get a ruling from the High Court that by no stretch of imagination can EIA report be deemed as intellectual property document. আরেকটা কথা একটু বলি on how to make and whether we blame the international corporations. Yes, we do, because we being poor and we not having the strongest regulation in place, they take advantage of it. What they do here in Bangladesh, they'll not do that in Australia. They'll not do that in Netherlands. And that is why you see that after so many years of Shell putting the fire in the gas field in Nigeria, they were held accountable by the Dutch court. But our first point of entry is definitely not the international corporations. It is our own government. আমরা এখানে many of us were talking about Japan withdrawing from Matarbari. I think we should give credit to our friends like Mehdi and Market Forces and others, I don't know the names of everyone, who have actually helped us articulate the grievances in a way that we can approach international community. We can build scientific arguments for creating enough pressure on them to withdraw.
Regarding the fourth question, when the international business companies, their main concern is about business, so how can we blame them on that particular point? This is the issue partly already covered by Rizwana Appa, saying that these transnational corporations or companies, having the benefit of their wealth, they always take actions without thinking the impacts on the country they are making the investments. These are the reasons why the UN binding treaty on business and human rights the discussion is going on. The main issue around this formation of this treaty is because of the power imbalance. And in countries like us, the governments, they are always tend to invite investment from the abroad, from the transnational corporations. And they cannot say no because of their own interest and because of the power necessity of the power to grow economically country-wise. So that's why they do not have the bargaining strength. The state in country like us do not have the bargaining strength against those transnational corporations to force them to comply with the human rights issues in country like Bangladesh. That is why this discussion is going on. That's why. But if you consider the impact of their investment, like already our eminent guest given some idea of what basically happens because of their investments. What are the problems we are facing because of these fossil-based power plantations? Our health risk is there, loss of life is there, carbon emission, because of the carbon emission we are losing our climate and environmental situation in country like us. Though we are not contributing that much because of the contributions of the rich countries, we are suffering most. So, and these transnational corporations coming into our country and investing on fossil-based power plants, they are basically worsening the situation. As we do not have the bargaining strength, that does not necessarily mean we can allow them whatever they want. That's why I have given an example that World Bank's investment cannot be unchallenged in this country anymore. So we can always question the investment of World Bank, but that is not the scenario with JICA or other transnational corporations we are facing now. We might have to take another course of action, legal action, to get some sort of directives from the courts as well on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you. With such legal luminaries like the two in the corner, I think judicial activism is like right up our street. They've been doing it all their lives. We'll try to wrap up in another 5 minutes. So quickly the questions, the two from the two ladies. Please speak in whatever language you feel comfortable.
Assalamu alaikum. This is Tamina, Head of Sustainability of Mutual Trust Bank. It's spellbinding actually to listen to Rizwana Appa, and I've been wanting for this kind of opportunity to actually have a face-to-face conversation with you, thanks to the platform, thanks to Hassan Bhai. But my question is, there are, me being a banker, I know that for sure, there are rules and regulations for the entrepreneurs, like we cannot go into conventional brick manufacturing, and every washing and dyeing entity should have a proper ETP installed, and we should take ECCs, environmental clearance certificates from DOE. So laws and rules are there. My question is, how can we ensure enforcement, Appa? Because as a banker, when I ask for ECC, our entrepreneurs sometimes tell that, okay, why you, Mutual Trust Bank, asking for this kind of document when other 60 other two banks are not asking for it? So since I can say for sure that there isn't any level playing field as for now, but as far as enforcement of the existing laws are concerned, how can we have a better scenario? In your opinion, what do you think we should do at this point in time? Thank you.
Wasn't there someone else there who had a question? Oh, yes, here. The two girls before that. And shall we close with those two questions?
Hello, I am Subha Samun, a student of Chittagong University. So my question was that given the circumstances, we cannot certainly phase out all the coal power plants. This isn't within our powers, but with the private investors, can we surely make a significant change within the renewable energy industry that can make a point from our side? Thank you.
And the girl next to you.
সো এই কনফারেন্সটা যেহেতু প্রসপারিটি নিয়ে, সো আমরা যা করছি সেটার থেকে এখন ইম্পর্টেন্ট আমরা ফিউচারে কি করব। সো ম্যাম বলতেছিল, রেজওয়ানা ম্যাম, যে ইআইএ রিপোর্টটার কথা অ্যান্ড ক্লিয়ারেন্স সার্টিফিকেট, ওইটা আমাদের ডিওইর তে দেওয়া আছে যে কোনো একটা প্রজেক্ট লঞ্চ করার জন্য অবভিয়াসলি ইআইএ অ্যান্ড ইসিসি করতে হয়। আমরা ফিউচারে এখন এনভায়রনমেন্টাল অডিটিং অনেক ইম্পর্টেন্ট একটা জিনিস, দেন লাইফ সাইকেল অ্যাসেসমেন্ট। সো আমরা দেখা যায় যে এইসব প্রজেক্ট নেই, এইসব প্রজেক্টে ইসিসি মানে অডিটিং অর লাইফ সাইকেল অ্যাসেসমেন্ট ল্যাক থাকে। তো ওগুলোর জন্য দেখা যায় যে অ্যাকাউন্টেবিলিটির অনেক ডিফারেন্স থাকে। তো কেন আমরা এই জিনিসগুলো মানে আমাদের কনস্টিটিউশনে প্রমোট করতেছি না, আমাদের রুলস অ্যান্ড রেগুলেশনে প্রমোট করতেছি না? থ্যাংক ইউ।
So is it time to relook at the rules, to rewrite them? And and tying in with the previous question from the lady banker, I think, we often think, those of us who push at IFIs, that at least they have some safeguards, So if there's an indigenous community which will be impacted or affected, then or you're going into that area, there will be what we call FPIC, which is free prior informed consent. Okay, clearly Bangladesh is not following that from what you said, Apa. And does the law of the land not mandate that? Then can we use other instruments which are international, like Jyotirmoy was talking of the legally binding instrument on business and human rights? Because the guiding principles of the UN on business and human rights haven't given results. They're only principles. So therefore, we are talking of a legally binding instrument which can harness multinational corporations from doing exactly what you said, Apa, that somewhere else in Europe they will behave differently, while they'll behave differently in Bangladesh or India or Pakistan. Therefore, a legally binding instrument is what we are working for. And I invite many of you to please join the Asian Task Force on the legally binding instrument on MNCs that we are also part of. Apa, I think it's in your court to respond to the two questions and to the larger questions before Bangladesh.
Thank you. Officially, you can't use the term indigenous here in Bangladesh. Letter has been sent to all the NGOs so that we don't use the term indigenous here in Bangladesh, number one. So this is the fight that we are having. It's not only not having a public consultation mechanism well spelled out in the law. It's about official recognition of a group of people who exist in this country. So we can't use the term officially, the term indigenous. You see, in terms of environmental performance, out of 180 countries, Bangladesh's rank is 179, which shows clearly that that a particular person is not environment friendly. There are people in the government who are environment friendly, but very little resource has been put in the environment department. So for the number of people that the Department of Environment here in Bangladesh serves, in the Philippines, the number is just 8 times more. So you can't expect them to be performing. But in Bangladesh, you will always hear that we don't have adequate manpower. In a country of 18 crore people, if you don't have manpower, you will never have manpower. Because you actually don't utilize people. You don't convert them into power. Our new environment conservation rule that they have just passed in 2023 requires public consultation, have actually elaborated on the process of public consultation. The earlier one required public consultation, but it did not elaborate on the process. Now you have a process in hand. It is mandatory for all banks not to issue loan, not to grant loan, if the entity is unable to produce an environmental clearance. They have to have an environmental clearance. So the rule can't be different from your bank to other bank. Other banks are just probably ignoring it. The law is very clear on that. On renewable energy, we are using the term prospect perhaps because we could not use the term challenges. We had to be politically correct to get our lawmakers with us. If we only talk about challenge, they'll be shy and they may say, we don't want to come. You guys are all negative. You always see the half glass filled and the rest half. You don't see the half glass filled. And that is the right perspective. If you don't see the half glass empty, you will never try to ensure that the full glass is full. No? If you see that half glass is full and you're happy with it, who is going to fill up the rest of it? So that is the right perspective, that you be critical. So the laws are there, the institutions are there, the political commitment, unfortunately in the last 10, 12 years, we have seen that it is not, we don't feel it anymore. And with shrinking democratic spaces here in Bangladesh, things are getting extra difficult for right defenders.
or any of the other participants, do you want to say anything more? No? Okay. I think now we need to look forward to, as someone said, we need to look forward into energy prosperity, and for that we have all of tomorrow with two plenaries, one in the morning and one in the afternoon, with which we'll close. In the morning, we're going to talk of just and equitable transition, pathways and the fact check. We want you all back in the multipurpose hall, which is this hall, tomorrow by 10 a.m., in which we will also... হ্যাঁ টি তো যাবেই সবাই না so tomorrow morning I mean, please do have your tea before you leave, but please be here by 10 a.m. because we would like to also bring out a kind of declaration from the conference, and it needs all your participation. Then do not tell us that there was no free prior informed consent. So please be here. We will do a joint declaration. We will try and push our parliamentarians to see that the IEPM is stalled, fingers crossed, at least for some time, so we can have a good look, a re-look at it, and have a good process. I know there are some people who are going to be very unhappy with that statement, but let's try. And then in the evening, we'll have the closing program at 2, and we will close by this time tomorrow. We will have Professor Rehman Shoban, who will give the valedictory speech, and Vasika Aisha Khan, MP, a very progressive parliamentary standing committee from the Ministry of Power, Energy and Mineral Resources, and co-chair of Climate Parliament Bangladesh, will listen to you and will speak to you as the guest of honor tomorrow afternoon. Thank you for being such a wonderful audience and such a great panel. Let's give them our hand. It starts with the rain and it goes into a full clap, but please honor the guests with a proper full clap. Thank you all. From Philippines, from Australia, from Japan, and from our Bangladesh. Thank you.